Emily Carter had planned a quiet evening in her small Portland home, a peaceful night she believed she truly deserved after a long, draining week at work, and she felt relieved when she finally sat down with a warm cup of chamomile tea, wrapped in a soft blanket while light rain tapped on her windows like a gentle rhythm meant to keep her company. Everything felt calm, steady, predictable, until a sudden knock on the front door shattered that peaceful moment and made her sit up with a mix of confusion and a strange feeling she couldn't name, because she wasn't expecting anyone and she rarely had visitors, especially at this hour. She hesitated for a brief moment, wondering who could be out in the heavy rain, but curiosity eventually pushed her to stand and walk toward the door, and when she opened it, she found Ethan Miller, her neighbor's 24-year-old son, standing there drenched from head to toe, rain dripping from his dark hair and soaking the shoulders of his jacket, his breath uneven as though he had walked fast or perhaps even run, and his eyes carried something she instantly recognized, worry mixed with something softer, something she had never seen in him before. Ethan had grown up next door, and Emily had watched him go from a shy little boy helping his mother carry groceries to a polite young man who offered to fix mailboxes, mow lawns, and shovel snow without expecting anything in return. But seeing him like this, disheveled, unsettled, almost vulnerable, made her feel a sudden jolt of protectiveness she didn't quite understand, and she stepped aside immediately, telling him to come in before the cold rain made him sick, not realizing that this simple act would shift the tone of her entire night. As he stepped inside, he apologized, saying he didn't mean to bother her and that he knew it was late, but something in his voice cracked slightly, which made Emily forget her own quiet evening instantly and instead focus on him, noticing how his shoulders were tense and how he didn't seem to know where to place his hands, as if he wasn't sure he belonged there. She guided him to the kitchen, where the warm light softened the sharp lines of tension on his face, and she handed him a towel to dry off while she warmed a second cup of tea for him, her mind moving faster than her words. Why was he here? What had happened? Why had he looked so lost on her doorstep? Yet she didn't ask right away because she sensed he needed a moment to gather himself. The silence was thick but not uncomfortable, more like two people sharing the same air for the first time in a way neither had expected, and as she placed the tea on the table in front of him, Ethan stared at the steam rising from the mug for a long time before finally whispering, "I think I messed up," and those 5 words opened a door she did not know existed, pulling her deeper into whatever storm he was carrying inside him. He didn't explain immediately, and Emily didn't push, but he kept tapping his fingers on the table, a nervous habit she remembered from watching him help his father fix things in the garage, and the sound felt like a quiet signal that he was battling something he didn't know how to say, and Emily found herself leaning forward slightly, trying to understand him without asking the question directly. She had known loneliness in her life, had lived alone for almost 2 years after her divorce, and she understood how hard it was to speak when the heart was tangled in confusion, so she simply told him, in the softest voice she could manage, that he was safe there and he could talk if he wanted to, and something in him loosened at those words, like a tight knot slowly coming undone. Ethan finally sighed and told her he had walked out of an important evening, one he was supposed to spend with someone he had been trying to build a relationship with, but he suddenly felt overwhelmed and couldn't go through with it, and instead of going home, he had found himself standing in front of her door without knowing exactly why. Which caught Emily off guard because it wasn't something people usually confessed with such honesty, and she had never imagined he would turn to her, of all people. In a moment like this, she watched him as he ran a hand through his wet hair, frustration lined across his forehead, and said he didn't understand why things felt wrong lately, why conversations felt heavy, why he felt lost in his job and unsure of where he was going in life, and he admitted that the thought of disappointing people made him anxious, especially his parents who still saw him as the responsible, stable son who always had everything together. Emily could feel his exhaustion under every word he spoke, and as she listened, she realized that this wasn't just about one evening, this was about him feeling like the ground under his feet was shifting, and he didn't know how to steady himself. She suddenly saw him in a different light, not as the cheerful neighbor's son who waved from across the street, but as an adult trying to navigate complicated emotions, and she was struck by the quiet sincerity in his voice when he looked at her and said he didn't know why, but whenever life felt too heavy, he somehow ended up thinking about her calm presence, about the peaceful energy her home always seemed to give off, and about how talking to her made his mind slow down enough to breathe again. Emily felt a small shock inside her chest at those words because they were unexpected, almost intimate in a way she wasn't prepared for, yet there was nothing inappropriate about them, only honesty, human connection, and a sense of trust she never knew he felt toward her. She tried to respond, but her throat tightened, because the truth was she had been lonely too, quietly carrying her own ache in silence, and hearing someone say she mattered, even in this gentle, simple way, hit her deeper than she expected. Before she could speak, Ethan quickly added that he wasn't trying to burden her or make things uncomfortable. But he hadn't known where else to go, and he didn't want his parents to worry about him, and he thought she would understand him without judging him. Emily felt a warm rush of empathy and told him softly that he hadn't done anything wrong by coming to her, and they both stood in the gentle glow of her kitchen light, the rain still falling outside like a slow, steady soundtrack to this unexpected moment, and for a brief second, their eyes met in a way that made the room feel smaller, quieter, and strangely meaningful. Emily didn't think of it as attraction or anything romantic, just two people who had accidentally crossed paths at the perfect moment, two souls carrying their own quiet cracks, finding comfort in each other's presence without knowing what it meant yet. And as she refilled his tea and he finally began to relax, she realized that something had shifted between them, something she couldn't quite name but could definitely feel. And even though the night had started as a simple evening of tea and solitude, Emily sensed that Ethan's unexpected visit would ripple through her life much longer than this stormy night, and this was only the beginning of a story she never saw coming. Ethan sat at Emily's kitchen table, the warmth of the tea steaming between them, and for a moment the room was quiet except for the rain tapping softly against the windows, and Emily watched him closely, noticing how tense he still looked, the way his fingers drummed lightly on the table, how his eyes seemed distant yet searching, as if trying to find words that wouldn't come easily, and she felt a mix of curiosity and concern because she could tell he wasn't used to sharing so much of himself with anyone, let alone someone like her, and she had always seen him as polite, cheerful, and responsible, but now she saw a side of him that made her heart ache slightly, the vulnerability of someone carrying too much alone, someone trying to prove he had it together while secretly wondering if he could ever manage, and she wanted to offer comfort, to say the right words that would ease the knot she could feel tightening in his chest, but instead she stayed quiet, letting him find his own pace, because she knew from her own life that people opened up best when they weren't rushed or judged. And slowly Ethan began speaking, first in small, hesitant phrases, admitting that his evening had been ruined, that the person he was supposed to meet didn't understand him the way he needed to be understood, that the pressure of expectations and responsibilities had made him want to run away, and somehow, unconsciously, he had ended up at her door, unable to explain why. And Emily listened intently, sensing the honesty and the trust he was placing in her by being there, and she realized it was rare to see someone so open without fear of judgment, which made her feel unexpectedly honored and moved, and she kept her voice soft and steady when she finally spoke, telling him it was okay, that everyone felt lost sometimes, and that sharing his feelings didn't make him weak, it made him human, and that one simple acknowledgement seemed to relax him just a little, his shoulders losing some tension, his fingers stopping their restless tapping, his gaze softening as he met hers, and he confessed more, saying he felt overwhelmed by life, by expectations at work, by the need to appear strong and capable to everyone, including his parents, who had always relied on him to be steady and responsible, and sometimes he felt like he couldn't live up to what they believed he could do, that the weight of being perfect was crushing, and hearing him speak so freely made Emily's chest tighten with empathy, because she had carried burdens too, and she recognized the fear of letting people down, the exhaustion that comes from always trying to be enough, and she felt a deep, silent connection forming in that room, a bond of understanding between two people who had both walked through challenges and now found themselves sharing a quiet, intimate space without words being rushed, without judgment, only presence, only understanding. And Ethan, noticing her calm attention, began speaking about how he had admired her from afar for years, how her strength, her composure, and the gentle way she treated everyone had always made him feel like there was someone in the world who knew how to face hardships with grace, and saying those words aloud made him almost shiver, as if releasing months of tension and quiet longing, and Emily felt a mix of emotions, surprise, warmth, a fluttering she couldn't quite describe, because she had never been praised like this by someone he had grown into adulthood, someone she had watched transform from a shy boy into a thoughtful young man, and there was something in his honesty that stirred a tenderness inside her she didn't expect. And she told him softly that she appreciated his trust and that it meant a lot to hear him share, and Ethan's eyes softened, a smile breaking briefly across his face, grateful and shy, and then he admitted, almost hesitantly, that being around her made him feel calm, like the world wasn't pressing down on him for a while, that somehow her presence reminded him that it was okay to pause and breathe, and Emily felt her heart tighten gently at those words because they were personal yet entirely innocent, and she realized that human connection, when honest and sincere, could have a quiet power, a warmth that left her both moved and reflective. And Ethan continued, explaining that he had never opened up to anyone like this before, that he didn't want to trouble anyone or appear weak, but with her it felt natural, like he could be himself without fear, and Emily nodded, feeling the weight of his trust, sensing the fragility beneath his words and the strength he was summoning just to speak, and she told him gently that sharing feelings was not a burden, that he could always feel safe expressing himself with her, and he seemed relieved. Like a small piece of anxiety had lifted, his posture loosening as he exhaled slowly. And then he spoke about his fears of failing, of disappointing those around him, and how lonely it felt carrying that weight, the pressure to perform, to be liked, to meet expectations, and Emily listened, her heart aching slightly for him, because she understood the fear of carrying invisible burdens alone, the quiet desperation of needing someone to simply see you, to acknowledge you, to let you exist without fixing anything, and she offered that silently by remaining present, by letting him know with her eyes, her small nods, her calm tone, that he was heard and understood, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, a smile tugged at the corners of his lips, a mixture of gratitude and relief, and he confessed finally that he didn't understand why he felt such a strong pull to her, that maybe it was because she had always been kind, because she had always treated him like a person and not just a neighbor, and because her presence made life feel steadier, and Emily felt a warm, unexpected ache in her chest at hearing him speak, feeling the quiet power of words that were heartfelt, innocent, and filled with unspoken trust, and she realized in that moment that their connection, fragile yet significant, had quietly deepened in ways neither of them could fully explain yet, and Ethan finally leaned back slightly, closing his eyes for a brief second as if releasing a tension he hadn't realized he had been holding, and then he opened them again and looked at her with a shy, soft smile. A mixture of hope, relief, and appreciation, and he said gently that he was grateful she had let him come in, that she had listened, and that it had meant more than he could put into words, and Emily felt tears threaten to rise, not of sadness, but of empathy, of understanding, of being seen in the quiet way he had just been seen, and she realized that night, that conversation, that simple act of opening her door and letting him in, had created a space between them that was intimate, not in a romantic way yet, but in a deeply human way, full of trust, vulnerability, and the fragile beginnings of emotional closeness, and she sat there quietly, sipping her tea, watching him relax, noticing the faint flush on his cheeks, the soft warmth in his eyes, the way he exhaled slowly, and she knew that this night, unexpected, stormy, emotional, was not just a moment but the start of something important, a quiet bond forming between two people who had both experienced loneliness and were now finding comfort, understanding, and a shared sense of calm in each other, and as the rain continued its steady rhythm against the window, the room felt warmer, lighter, like the world outside was still chaotic but inside these walls, trust and connection had been quietly established, leaving both of them changed in ways they could not yet name, and Emily realized that even though the evening had started as a quiet night alone, it had transformed into something unexpected, emotional, and profoundly moving, and she couldn't help but wonder what would come next, knowing deep down that the honesty and vulnerability shared here tonight would linger, shaping their relationship, their understanding of each other, and perhaps even the course of their lives in ways neither could foresee, but both would remember forever. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft tapping of rain against the windows and the faint steam rising from their cups of tea, and Emily could feel the tension around Ethan slowly shifting, the way his shoulders, which had been tight and rigid when he first arrived, now sagged slightly as if he were finally allowing himself to relax just a little, and she watched him with a mix of curiosity, concern, and something she couldn't name, a warmth in her chest that made her aware of how deeply she cared about this young man she had known since he was a child, yet now saw in a new, more vulnerable light. And Ethan's gaze drifted to hers with hesitation, searching for permission to continue, to open his heart fully, and Emily offered it simply by keeping her expression gentle, her hands folded loosely on the table, giving him space to speak without pressure or judgment, and slowly he began to share more than he had before, revealing the weight of his recent heartbreak, the confusion and loneliness he felt when his carefully built plans didn't work out, the fear that he wasn't living up to anyone's expectations, and how despite trying to appear composed, he constantly felt like he was failing in small ways that added up to a heavy burden he carried silently, and as he spoke, his voice wavered just enough to reveal the rawness beneath his calm exterior, the part of him that longed for understanding, for someone to listen without offering solutions or criticism, and Emily found herself leaning in slightly, not to interrupt but to show that she was present fully, absorbing every word, feeling his emotions as if they were hers for a brief, shared moment, and she realized that this was more than a casual conversation, more than an unexpected visit. It was an opening of a heart, an unspoken plea for connection that neither of them had anticipated, and Ethan's words tumbled out in a gentle rush as he confessed that he admired her, not just for her kindness or strength, but for the way she carried herself through life with grace, the way she seemed calm even when circumstances were difficult, and how seeing her navigate challenges inspired him and made him feel like someone in the world could be steady when everything else felt chaotic. And Emily felt a flutter of emotion, a delicate mixture of surprise, tenderness, and a quiet ache in her chest because it was rare to hear such honesty, especially from someone who had always seemed so composed, polite, and controlled, and she wondered how long he had held these thoughts inside, and how much courage it took for him to speak them aloud now, and as he continued, Ethan admitted that being with her, even for these few moments, made him feel safe, like he could pause, breathe, and let go of some of the constant pressure he carried, and Emily's heart responded without thought, a soft warmth spreading through her chest, because she too had carried burdens alone, had spent years rebuilding herself after loss and heartbreak, and suddenly she understood how comforting human presence could be, how just being seen and heard could ease a loneliness that words often failed to capture, and she met his gaze steadily, letting him know with a small nod, a quiet smile, and her attentive eyes that she understood, that she cared, and that she valued his trust, and Ethan, encouraged by her reaction, moved slightly closer, not crossing boundaries, not imposing, just narrowing the space between them in a way that felt natural and safe, his presence warm, steady, yet respectful, and he continued speaking, sharing moments of doubt, tiny regrets, fears of failure, and the moments of heartbreak that had left him questioning himself, and Emily listened, feeling her own emotions stir, because she knew too well what it felt like to struggle quietly while everyone else assumed you had it together, to carry disappointment, fear, and longing all at once, and she felt a profound connection forming, one that was neither rushed nor forced, but gentle, authentic, and deeply human, and Ethan's words grew softer as he admitted he had rarely felt this understood by anyone, that his life often felt like a series of expectations and responsibilities that left little room for truth or vulnerability, and that tonight, sharing with her, felt like a weight lifting, even if just slightly, and Emily felt a protective tenderness, a desire to offer him calm and reassurance without overstepping, and as he paused, looking at her with those sincere, searching eyes, she could sense the vulnerability that came from revealing so much, and she reached out instinctively, lightly placing her hand on the table near his, not touching him, not forcing closeness, but giving him a sense of grounding, a gentle acknowledgement that he was not alone, and Ethan's breath caught briefly. A small, grateful smile tugging at his lips, his eyes flickering with emotion he hadn't yet named, and he whispered softly, almost to himself, that he didn't know why she had this effect on him, why being near her made his chest feel lighter, why speaking to her calmed the storm inside him, and Emily felt her own heart respond, a warmth and ache mingling as she realized she had also been affected, that his presence stirred something gentle and protective inside her, something tender that wanted to nurture without controlling, to listen without judgment, and to simply be present, and Ethan, sensing the depth of her attention and the safety she offered, allowed himself to lean back slightly, exhaling slowly as if releasing a tension he had carried for days or weeks, and then, with a quiet courage, he admitted that he had never opened up like this to anyone, that he had been used to holding his feelings in, pretending he was fine, but with her, It felt natural to be honest, to show the parts of himself that were scared, unsure, and searching, and Emily felt tears threaten to rise at the beauty of this trust, at the rarity of such pure emotional sharing, and she responded softly, telling him that he was not a burden, that opening up took strength, and that she valued his honesty, and that she was glad he had come to her, and Ethan's smile broadened gently, grateful and shy, as he admitted that sometimes he wished he could remain in this safe, quiet space, away from judgment, away from expectation, where he could simply be himself and feel accepted, and Emily nodded, understanding completely because she too had longed for spaces like this, places where one could simply exist without having to perform or hide, and the room seemed to shift, warmer, lighter, filled with a quiet intimacy that neither had planned but both experienced fully, as if time had slowed for them while the storm continued outside, and in that moment, Emily realized that what had started as an unexpected visit had transformed into something much deeper, a connection formed through honesty, vulnerability, and trust, a bond that was emotional, innocent, and quietly powerful, and Ethan, feeling seen and understood, paused, then smiled softly, thanking her once again for letting him in, for listening, for being the calm he had unknowingly needed, and Emily felt the ache in her chest soften, a mix of relief, warmth, and a stirring of something she hadn't expected but welcomed, a gentle awareness that their lives had intersected in a meaningful way, that this night would linger in both of their memories, and that this shared emotional closeness, tender and respectful, could grow in ways neither could yet predict, but that for now, it was enough that they had each other in that quiet kitchen, sharing tea, stories, fears, and understanding, in a moment that was innocent yet profound, simple yet full of emotion, and as Ethan looked out the window at the falling rain, then back at her with a quiet, sincere gaze, Emily felt a spark of hope and curiosity for what was to come, knowing that their bond had shifted tonight, and that even the smallest gestures, the soft words, and the shared presence of two hearts willing to be honest, had created something rare, fragile, and unforgettable, a beginning of trust and emotional intimacy that neither of them could ignore, and as the rain continued, their conversation dwindled into comfortable silence, a pause that was neither awkward nor empty, but full of feeling, full of recognition, full of the unspoken promise that they had found a rare connection, one that would stay with them long after the storm passed, leaving Emily and Ethan both aware that their lives had been touched in a way that was gentle, meaningful, and profoundly human, a moment of shared vulnerability that neither would forget, and as they sipped the last of their tea and listened to the rain, the room held a warmth and quiet beauty that hinted at the next chapter of their emotional journey, the growth of trust, the strengthening of understanding, and the unfolding of feelings neither had yet dared to name but both felt deeply. Emily sat quietly in the soft kitchen light, feeling the warmth of the tea she had sipped slowly, noticing how the storm outside had started to ease, the rain now a gentle patter against the windows, and she watched Ethan carefully, aware that the conversation they had shared over the past hour had opened a door between them that neither had expected. A door full of honesty, trust, and quiet emotions that lingered in the space, and she realized how much she valued his presence, how comforting it was to simply have him there, speaking freely, sharing fears, regrets, and moments of vulnerability, and as he leaned back slightly in his chair, a faint smile tugging at his lips, she could see a mixture of relief, gratitude, and a shy hopefulness in his eyes, the kind of look that told her he had unburdened himself in a way that was rare, meaningful, and deeply human, and she felt a soft ache in her chest, a tenderness that came not from romance yet, but from the recognition of someone trusting her with their heart, someone letting her see the real them without expectation, judgment, or pressure, and she knew she wanted to honor that trust, to hold that space gently and respectfully, because moments like this were fragile and precious, and as Ethan began speaking again, his voice softer, quieter, he admitted that he had never realized how much he had needed this, how much he had longed for a connection where he could simply exist without pretending, without performing, without fear of letting someone down, and Emily felt her heart respond with warmth, realizing that their bond had grown stronger in the silence and conversation they had shared, a connection neither had planned but both felt deeply, and as he paused, glancing at her with a vulnerability that made her breath catch, he said softly that being near her made him feel safe, calm, and unexpectedly understood, that in a world where he often felt pressure, confusion, and loneliness, her presence reminded him that someone could simply listen and care without expecting anything in return, and Emily felt a deep, quiet satisfaction and tenderness at hearing this, knowing that her simple kindness, her attentiveness, her calm demeanor had created a space for him to be seen in a way he rarely experienced, and she smiled gently, telling him that it was okay, that she was glad he had come, and that he could always share his thoughts and feelings without fear or judgment, and Ethan's eyes softened, a shy, grateful smile forming, and he reached for her hand, placing it lightly on the table, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his skin, not crossing any boundaries, but offering a gesture of trust, comfort, and connection that made the moment feel profound, and Emily felt a flutter of emotion she hadn't anticipated, a mix of tenderness, protection, and a gentle longing, not inappropriately, but in the pure human sense of caring for someone deeply, wanting them to feel safe, and wanting to share the quiet intimacy of being understood, and Ethan, noticing her calm, steady presence, whispered softly that he had been afraid to open up like this, to let someone in fully, but being with her, even for a short while, had made the weight of his burdens feel lighter, had reminded him that kindness and patience existed in the world, and Emily's chest warmed as she realized how significant this moment was. For both of them, how the simple act of listening, of offering care, and of being present had created something rare and meaningful, something neither had expected but both would carry with them, and she nodded gently, telling him that sharing emotions was a sign of strength, not weakness, and that it was a gift to be able to trust someone enough to show them your heart, and Ethan smiled again, quietly, shyly, grateful, and for a moment they sat in silence, letting the connection breathe. Letting the emotions settle, feeling the calm after the storm, feeling the human warmth that had grown between them, and then he stood slowly, his movement careful, as if reluctant to leave this safe space, and Emily felt a soft pang of longing, a desire to prolong this moment, to hold on to the quiet intimacy that had been shared, and Ethan noticed her expression, paused at the door, and looked back with a soft, hopeful smile, and in that small gesture, a silent promise passed between them, an acknowledgement that this connection, this emotional bond, was not fleeting, that it mattered, and that they both valued it deeply, and then he spoke gently, saying he didn't expect anything, that he just wanted her to know she mattered, that she had made a difference tonight by simply being present, listening, and caring, and Emily felt her chest tighten with emotion, realizing how rare and beautiful it was to be trusted, to be recognized in such a simple yet profound way, and she responded softly, telling him he mattered too, that moments like these reminded her that human connection was what made life meaningful, and Ethan's eyes glistened slightly with gratitude, his smile small but full, and then he finally stepped out into the fading rain, pausing only once to glance back, offering another quiet, meaningful look that made Emily's heart flutter gently, a mix of warmth, tenderness, and a bittersweet ache, and as the door closed behind him, she felt the emptiness of the room, but it was not loneliness, it was a quiet, reflective space filled with memories of the conversation, the shared vulnerability, the gestures of trust, and the deep emotional resonance of their connection, and she realized that even though he had left, the bond created tonight would linger in both their hearts, shaping how they viewed each other, how they understood trust, kindness, and the quiet power of being truly seen, and Emily sat back down, holding her tea, breathing slowly, aware that her life had shifted subtly, that she had experienced something rare and gentle, something that reminded her that meaningful connections could appear unexpectedly, that moments of openness, honesty, and warmth could change the course of an evening, even of a life, and she smiled softly to herself, feeling a new sense of hope and curiosity about the future, knowing that tonight, both she and Ethan had shared a profound emotional moment, one built on trust, understanding, and quiet human intimacy, a beginning that neither of them fully understood yet but that would stay with them, remembered in the softest, most tender way, as the rain outside faded into a gentle drizzle, leaving a calm, reflective night behind them, a night that had started as ordinary but had become extraordinary, a night where hearts had opened, feelings had been acknowledged, and a quiet, respectful connection had blossomed, and Emily, alone now but not lonely, felt a sense of warmth and anticipation, a gentle knowing that this story, their story, was just beginning, carrying the weight of emotion, trust, and human kindness. And as she finally stood to look out the window at the dark, rain-swept street, she held the memory of Ethan's eyes, his words, his gentle smile, and the soft moment of connection they had shared, feeling both grateful and quietly excited for the days ahead, knowing that sometimes, life offered the most profound experiences not through grand gestures but through small, honest, heartfelt moments shared between two people who dared to be open. And she understood that this night, this conversation, this brief, intimate connection, would linger in her heart for a long time, shaping her understanding of trust, emotional courage, and the subtle, beautiful beginnings of a bond that could grow into something deeply meaningful, something pure, something human, leaving her with a quiet, heartfelt hope that in life, such connections were rare but transformative, and she knew she would never forget this night, this visit, and the unexpected way it had changed everything in ways gentle, emotional, and profoundly touching.